I never imagined that at 72 years old I would be standing in front of a mirror, smoothing the wrinkles of a pale blue dress, and wondering whether I was about to make the strangest decision of my life. For most of my life, I had been a sensible woman. I married young, raised 2 children, worked quietly beside my husband while he built his small carpentry business, and tried my best to keep our modest home warm and steady. We were never rich, but we were content. My husband Peter had the kind of laugh that filled a room, and the patience to fix anything that broke, chairs, cupboards, even people's moods. When Peter passed away 9 years ago, the silence he left behind was heavier than any grief I had known. The house felt too large for one person. The clock ticked louder. Even the kettle seemed to whistle more sharply when it boiled. At first I told myself that loneliness was simply part of growing old. My children lived far away, my daughter in another country, and my son on the other side of the state. They called often, but calls end, and evenings stretch long. I filled my days with routines: morning tea, a slow walk to the market, reading old books Peter and I used to share, watching birds from the kitchen window. But routines cannot hug you. They cannot sit beside you during thunderstorms, or laugh at small jokes over dinner. That is how I met Harold. It happened in the most ordinary way possible, at the Pensioners' Community Center on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I had gone there mostly because the weather made the house feel especially empty. They were hosting a small tea gathering for seniors. I remember the smell of biscuits and weak coffee, and the chatter of people discussing grandchildren and aching knees. Harold sat alone near the window. He was a tall man, though age had bent his shoulders slightly forward. His hair was silver and thin, and he wore a neatly pressed brown jacket that looked older than most of the people in the room. What struck me most was not his appearance, but the way he watched everyone else, quietly, almost cautiously. When I walked past, he gave a polite nod. "Good afternoon," he said. His voice was gentle, but carried a trace of loneliness I recognized immediately. "Good afternoon," I replied, sitting in the empty chair across from him. That was the beginning. We started with small conversations: the weather, the poor quality of the center's coffee, the price of groceries these days. But gradually, our talks deepened. Harold had lost his wife 5 years earlier. They had no children. After her passing, he sold their apartment and moved into a small pensioner's residence nearby. "I thought I'd get used to it," he told me once, staring into his cup. but evenings are long when no one is waiting for you. I understood that feeling more than I cared to admit. Soon we began meeting regularly at the center. Sometimes we walked in the nearby park. Other times we simply sat on a bench, feeding crumbs to pigeons and talking about our pasts. Harold was thoughtful in quiet ways. He remembered that I liked cinnamon biscuits and would bring them occasionally. He always walked on the side of the sidewalk closest to the road, a habit from another generation. Months passed like this. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset in the park, Harold cleared his throat nervously. "Margaret," he said, "I hope this doesn't sound foolish." I smiled. At our age, we're allowed to be foolish. He chuckled softly, but his hands trembled slightly. "I was wondering whether you might consider companionship something official." It took me a moment to understand what he meant. "You're asking me to marry you?" He nodded, looking both hopeful and terrified. For a long time I didn't answer. Marriage at 72 was not something I had ever imagined. My life with Peter had been full and real. Could I truly begin something new? But Harold wasn't asking for romance the way young people do. He was asking for partnership, warm dinners shared with someone, quiet evenings where silence felt comfortable rather than empty. "I don't want to spend whatever time I have left alone," he said softly. His honesty moved me. I asked for time to think. Over the next weeks, I considered everything carefully. I spoke with my children. They were surprised but supportive. "Mom," my daughter said over the phone, "if he makes you happy, that's what matters." Eventually, I agreed. Harold's face lit up in a way that reminded me of a young man. We planned a simple civil registration, no grand ceremony, just a few witnesses and a small lunch afterward. The date was set for a quiet Thursday morning. And so, on that morning, I stood in front of the mirror in my pale blue dress, adjusting the collar nervously. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear exactly, more from the weight of stepping into a new chapter so late in life. Harold was supposed to meet me at the registry office in 30 minutes. I picked up my handbag and glanced around the house. Peter's old photograph still stood on the shelf. I paused for a moment in front of it. "I hope you understand," I whispered softly. Then I walked toward the door. Outside, the sky was clear, the kind of gentle spring morning that feels like a promise. I arrived at the registry office early. The building was small and quiet, with polished wooden floors and tall windows that let in warm sunlight. I sat in the waiting area, my heart beating faster than it had in years. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Harold had not arrived yet. I checked the clock again. 30 minutes before the registration, everything changed. The door opened suddenly, and a young woman rushed inside. Her face was pale, and she looked directly at me. "Are you Margaret?" she asked urgently. "Yes," I replied, confused. She hesitated before speaking again. "You can't marry Harold." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath. "Because you deserve to know the truth about him." And in that moment, the quiet morning I had imagined shattered completely.